Before we begin, please be advised that this story contains themes of suspense, psychological tension, and unsettling situations that some listeners may find disturbing. Listener discretion is advised. The engine sputtered, coughed once, and then died. The silence that followed wasn't just the absence of sound. It was a hungry, suffocating void that swallowed the last echoes of my panicked breath. I was stranded in Ashwood County, and I knew with a certainty that chilled me to my bones that I had just made the gravest mistake of my life. My name is Sarah Miller, and just a few weeks ago I was convinced I had my whole life figured out. I just landed my dream job as a graphic designer in a bustling city 3 states away from my small hometown in Ohio. It was a fresh start, a clean slate, a chance to leave behind the quiet, predictable life I'd always known. The plan was simple. Pack up my trusty old sedan, drive straight through, and arrive ready to conquer the world. I'd mapped out the route meticulously, planned my playlists, stocked up on snacks, and even downloaded a few podcasts for the long stretches of highway. What I hadn't planned for was a detour, a seemingly innocuous shortcut that promised to shave an hour off my journey, leading me directly into the heart of Ashwood County. Now you might be thinking, what's so bad about a county? They're all pretty much the same, right? And for the most part, you'd be correct. But Ashwood isn't like other counties. It exists in the shadowy corners of maps, whispered about in hushed tones by truck stop regulars and seen only as a blur by those fortunate enough to pass through without incident. It's the kind of place that feels less like a geographical location and more like a fever dream or a forgotten chapter from an old, unsettling folktale. I remember filling up my tank at a greasy, rundown gas station just before the Ashwood County line. The attendant, a wiry old man with eyes that seemed to hold 1,000 unspoken stories, glanced at my license plate, then at my face, a flicker of something unreadable passing through his gaze. He handed back my card, his voice a low rumble. "Headed far, miss?" "Just to the city, another few hours," I'd replied, trying to sound confident, but already feeling a strange prickle of unease. He nodded slowly, wiping his hands on a stained rag. "You're taking the interstate, right? The 71. Actually, my GPS suggested a shortcut through Ashwood County," I said, pointing vaguely towards the digital map on my phone. The old man froze. The rag dropped to the floor with a soft thud. His eyes, suddenly sharp and intense, fixed on mine. "Ashwood, huh?" he muttered, more to himself than to me. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Look, I don't know what that fancy map of yours says, but you listen to an old man who's seen enough to know. You go through Ashwood, you don't stop. Not for nothing. Not for nobody. You keep that car moving, you hear? Don't stop. For anything. Everything you got, you keep it moving." He straightened up then, his face returning to its previous impassive state, as if he hadn't just delivered a chilling prophecy. I laughed it off, of course. "Thanks for the advice, I guess," I'd said, dismissing it as rural superstition, the ramblings of a man who'd probably spent too much time alone. I paid him, got back in my car, and drove off, the old man's words echoing in my mind, but quickly fading against the excitement of my new adventure. I should have listened. The moment I crossed the county line, something shifted. The air grew heavier, the sunlight seemed to dim, even though it was still mid-afternoon. The vibrant greens of the surrounding forests gave way to a darker, more oppressive shade, the trees growing denser, their branches interlocking overhead like skeletal fingers, forming a perpetual twilight tunnel. The road itself, once a smooth asphalt ribbon, became a pockmarked, cracked expanse of forgotten tar, winding its way through an endless, silent wilderness. My GPS, which had been so confident just minutes before, suddenly went haywire. The cheerful female voice stuttered, repeating directions that made no sense, before finally declaring, "GPS signal lost." My phone, a lifeline in any other circumstance, went from full bars to a single flickering sliver, then to a dead zone. The silence inside the car, once filled with my upbeat playlist, became absolute. I fumbled with the radio, hoping to catch a local station, but all I got was static, a harsh, hissing white noise that grated on my nerves. Mile after mile, the landscape remained unchanged. Dense, dark woods on either side, broken only by the occasional glimpse of a dilapidated farmhouse, its windows like vacant eyes staring out from beneath a heavy brow of overgrown vines. No other cars, no signs of life, just the rhythmic hum of my tires on the rough pavement and the growing knot of apprehension in my stomach. The old man's warning, once a distant echo, was now a persistent whisper. growing louder with every passing mile. Asterisk, don't stop. For anything. Everything you got, you keep it moving. Asterisk. I tried to shake off the feeling, to rationalize it. It was just a remote area, I told myself. No big deal. But then I started noticing things. Strange, crude symbols carved into the bark of ancient trees, barely visible in the fading light. Distant, almost imperceptible sounds that seemed to come from deeper within the woods. A low thrum, a rustling that wasn't quite wind, a faint, almost melodic hum that seemed to vibrate in the very air around me. My eyes darted from side to side, constantly scanning the tree line, convinced I saw movement, a shadow that wasn't quite a shadow, a fleeting glimpse of something just beyond the periphery of my vision. The tension in my shoulders was a physical ache. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. I just needed to get through this. Just keep driving. Don't stop. The words became a mantra, a desperate plea to whatever unseen forces seemed to be watching me from the depths of Ashwood. Then the car lurched. A sickening thump echoed through the chassis, followed by a harsh, grating sound that made my teeth clench. The steering wheel jerked violently in my hands, pulling me sharply to the right. My heart leaped into my throat. A flat tire. In Ashwood County, the universe, it seemed, had a truly twisted sense of humor. I fought to keep the car straight, wrestling with the wheel as it veered towards a ditch. My foot slammed on the brake, bringing the vehicle to a shuddering, grinding halt on the side of the desolate road. The car died almost instantly, plunging me into that terrifying, all-consuming silence. For a long moment I just sat there, my breath catching in my throat, my hands still clutched to the wheel. The air outside was thick and still, heavy with the scent of damp earth and something else. Something metallic, almost acrid. I could feel the thumping of my own heart in my ears, a frantic drumbeat against the overwhelming quiet. The old man's warning screamed in my head. I had stopped. I had broken the cardinal rule of Ashwood County. Slowly, carefully, I reached for my phone, a futile gesture, knowing it was dead. I pressed the power button anyway, just in case. Nothing. The screen remained stubbornly blank, a dark mirror reflecting my terrified face. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. My eyes scanned the dense wall of trees, now darker, more menacing than ever. The faint melodic hum I'd heard earlier seemed to swell, just barely perceptible. A low vibration that resonated not just in the air, but deep within my bones. A sudden sharp crack from the woods to my right made me jump, letting out a small involuntary gasp. It sounded like a twig snapping, heavy and deliberate, as if something large had just stepped on it. My head whipped around, straining to see past the gloom, past the tangled undergrowth. Nothing. Just the endless, suffocating darkness of the forest. But the feeling was undeniable. I wasn't alone, and whatever was out there, it had noticed I had stopped. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the silence. Every nerve-ending scream, demanding I move, demanding I escape. The engine. I had to get the engine started. My hands, slick with cold sweat, fumbled for the ignition, twisting the key with desperate force. The starter motor whined, a pathetic, dying gasp, but the engine remained stubbornly silent, refusing to catch. I tried again, and again. Each failed attempt echoed in the oppressive quiet, amplifying the terror that was now a cold, hard knot in my stomach. "Come on, you piece of junk," I muttered through gritted teeth, my voice a shaky whisper in the claustrophobic confines of the car. The dashboard lights glowed mockingly, a beacon of false hope in the encroaching darkness. I slammed my fist against the steering wheel, a futile gesture that only served to sting my knuckles and remind me of my helplessness. Then the words of the old man at the gas station miles back clawed their way into my mind. His eyes, roomy and distant, had held a strange, knowing glint. "Don't stop in Ashwood, son. Not for anything." I'd laughed it off then, attributing it to an eccentric local, another piece of small-town folklore. Now those words were a chilling prophecy, a warning I had foolishly disregarded. Ashwood County. I was deep in it now, and I had stopped. The air in the car grew heavy, thick with my own panicked breathing. I could feel the sweat trickling down my spine, my clothes sticking uncomfortably. My eyes darted from side to side, scanning the inky blackness beyond the windshield, the side windows. The forest pressed in, a wall of shadows and unseen things. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, my head swiveling, trying to pierce the gloom, trying to catch a glimpse of what I knew was out there. A twig snapped. Not the delicate, random snap of a squirrel or a bird, but a heavy, deliberate crack, as if something substantial had just shifted its weight. It came from the passenger side, startlingly close, perhaps only 20 feet from the car. My breath hitched. My entire body tensed, muscles coiled, ready to spring though I had nowhere to go. My gaze locked onto the spot where the sound had originated, but the darkness was absolute, a hungry void that swallowed light and sound alike. "Hello," I rasped, the word barely audible, a pathetic attempt to challenge the unseen. Only the sound of my own ragged breathing answered. The silence that followed was even more terrifying than the snap, a pregnant pause that suggested whatever was out there was now listening, assessing. My hand instinctively went for my phone. A flicker of hope. Maybe I could call for help. I pulled it from my pocket, the screen a brief, blessed rectangle of light in the overwhelming darkness. My heart sank. No service. The words glared back at me, a cruel joke. And then, as if to twist the knife, the battery icon flashed red, a single solitary bar, before winking out entirely. The screen went black. Dead. Completely, utterly dead. I was truly alone. A fresh wave of panic washed over me, cold and consuming. My only connection to the outside world severed. I was stranded, isolated, and seemingly hunted. What choice did I have? I had to check the engine. It was illogical, dangerous, but staying put felt like waiting for a predator to make its move. If something was wrong, maybe I could fix it. Maybe. It was a desperate gamble, but I had to try. With a deep, shuddering breath, I reached for the hood release. The latch gave a soft thunk. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the door handle. Every instinct screamed at me to stay inside, to huddle in the perceived safety of the metal shell. But the engine wasn't going to fix itself, and whatever was out there, it wasn't going to leave. Taking another ragged breath, I pushed open the driver's side door, the creak eerily loud in the profound silence. A blast of cold, damp air hit me, carrying with it the scent of wet earth, pine needles, and something else. Something subtle, metallic, almost like ozone, but mixed with a faint, cloying sweetness like decaying leaves or worse. I swung my legs out, my feet landing on the soft shoulder of the road. My eyes strained, trying to adjust to the deeper darkness outside the car. The moon, a sliver of silver, wrestled with the dense canopy, casting only fragmented, dancing shadows. I fumbled for the flashlight in the glove compartment, my fingers trembling as I clicked it on. The beam, a frail yellow spear, cut through the impenetrable blackness, revealing only a small illuminated circle. It felt woefully inadequate, a child's toy against the vast, consuming night. I held it out in front of me, sweeping it back and forth, my head turning on a swivel as I slowly made my way to the front of the car. The beam danced across the rusted guardrail, the thick, thorny undergrowth, the towering ancient trees that formed an oppressive wall around the narrow road. My heart pounded with each step. I felt exposed, vulnerable, like a lone deer stepping into a hunter's crosshairs. The feeling of being watched intensified, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. I whipped around, sweeping the flashlight in a wide arc. Nothing, just the endless, silent trees. But the feeling persisted, a cold, undeniable certainty that I was not alone. I reached the front of the car, my hand shaking as I lifted the hood. The engine compartment, normally a familiar tangle of wires and metal, looked alien and menacing under the weak beam of my flashlight. I scanned for anything obvious. Loose cables, a disconnected hose, a puddle of fluid. Nothing. Everything seemed to be in its place, pristine and undisturbed. Yet the engine was dead. And that strange, metallic organic smell was stronger here, emanating from somewhere deep within the machinery. It was sickening, vaguely familiar in a way I couldn't quite place, a scent that prickled the back of my throat. As I leaned closer, peering into the dark recesses, my flashlight beam briefly caught something on the trunk of a large oak tree just at the very edge of the road, perhaps 15 feet into the forest. It was a carving, crude and ancient, etched deep into the bark. It wasn't a heart with initials, or a random doodle. It was a symbol, a series of interlocking jagged lines, forming a vaguely humanoid shape with oversized, elongated limbs and a featureless oval head. It looked primitive, almost ritualistic, and deeply unsettling. It felt out of place, not like something a casual hiker would carve. My blood ran cold. This wasn't some random spot in the woods. This felt significant, like a marker. A sudden guttural thump-thump echoed from the deeper woods, closer this time, accompanied by a soft, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled through the undergrowth. It wasn't an animal. It was too regular, too deliberate. The sound seemed to circle, to pace, just beyond the reach of my flashlight, just out of sight. My breath caught in my throat. My mind screamed at me to run, to get back in the car, to do anything but stand there. I slammed the hood down with a resounding clunk that echoed through the silent forest, a desperate, futile attempt to create some noise, any noise, other than the terrifying sounds of whatever was coming. Scrambling, I practically threw myself back into the driver's seat, fumbling with the door handle, pulling it shut with a desperate slam. The lock clicked, a small, inadequate barrier against the encroaching dread. My heart hammered so violently it felt like it would burst through my chest. I stared out into the oppressive darkness, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. The car felt less like a sanctuary and more like a flimsy trap. I was a fish in a barrel, waiting for the hunter to take aim. Then the headlights, which had been stubbornly off, flickered. Once, twice, and then with a soft pop, they died completely, plunging the entire scene into absolute, suffocating blackness. Only the faint, ghostly moonlight, battling through the thick canopy, offered any hint of the world outside. Inside the car, it was like being buried alive. A faint scraping sound against the passenger door. Slow, deliberate. My eyes, now useless in the dark, darted towards the sound. A low, soft tap. It wasn't a knock, not human. It was heavier, duller, like a blunt nail dragging against the metal. And then the unmistakable sound of something heavy, something massive, slowly, deliberately dragging itself across the roof of my car. I froze, paralyzed by an icy terror that gripped me from my toes to the roots of my hair. It was on the car. It was on the car. And I was trapped. The weight pressed down, a groaning symphony of tortured metal as the roof of my ancient sedan protested. Every fiber of my being screamed for me to move, to accelerate, to do something, anything, but my foot remained glued to the brake pedal, my hands clenched white-knuckled on the steering wheel. The rain hammered down, a relentless drum solo on the windshield, yet somehow, through that cacophony, I could still hear it. The scrape, the drag, the sickening thump as whatever monstrosity had found its perch shifted its colossal mass. My breath hitched. My throat was a desert. I couldn't even manage a whimper. All I could do was stare straight ahead into the impenetrable wall of rain and darkness, my eyes wide, unblinking, trying to discern anything in my peripheral vision, but there was nothing. Just the distorted reflections of the dashboard lights on the wet glass, and the terrifying knowledge that it was directly above me. What was it? An animal? No animal I knew of made a sound like that or possessed such crushing weight. Person? A person couldn't be this heavy, this slow, this unnatural. The thought sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. My mind, in a desperate attempt to rationalize the impossible, cycled through scenarios. A fallen tree branch? But the dragging sound, the deliberate movement. No, this was alive. Or at least it moved. The car dipped slightly on the passenger side, then the driver's, as if the thing was testing the structural integrity of its new platform. I could feel the vibrations through the seat, through the steering wheel, a low guttural hum that resonated deep in my bones. It was moving slowly towards the front of the car, towards the windshield, towards me. Panic, raw and visceral, threatened to consume me. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. My vision began to tunnel, the edges blurring into a hazy gray. I needed to move. I had to move. But the sheer terror held me captive, a psychological straitjacket far more effective than any physical restraint. My muscles were locked, rigid. Then a new sound, a scratching. Not the slow drag, but a sharper, more deliberate scrape, scrape, scrape against the metal, almost like claws. It was coming from the front of the roof, just above the windshield. My eyes were fixated on that area, even though I knew I wouldn't see anything through the deluge and the darkness. But my imagination, an unbidden and cruel master, was painting vivid, horrifying pictures in my mind. I squeezed my eyes shut for a fraction of a second, then snapped them open. No, I couldn't afford to look away. I had to know. I had to see. If I was going to die out here, I wanted to at least know what was taking me. A morbid curiosity, perhaps, but it felt like a primal need. The scratching continued, methodical, relentless. It was working its way down towards the top edge of the windshield. My breath hitched again. Was it trying to get in? Was it trying to see me? The thought was unbearable. I could feel the thrumming vibrations intensify, the car groaning in protest. Suddenly, the scratching stopped. The silence, after the cacophony of the rain and the scraping, was deafening. A vacuum that sucked all the air from my lungs. My entire body tensed, every nerve ending screaming in anticipation. What now? What was it doing? A shadow, darker than the night itself, began to coalesce at the very top edge of the windshield, directly in front of me. It was subtle at first, just a slight distortion in the rain-streaked glass, but then it grew, solidifying, blocking out the faint, diffuse light from the distant streetlights. Something was descending. Something huge. My blood ran cold. My stomach lurched. I wanted to scream, but no sound would come. All I could do was watch, transfixed by the unfolding horror. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, a shape began to emerge. Not a face, not yet. Just a mass, a dark, amorphous blob pressing against the glass. It was immense, filling the entire top third of my windshield. And it was moving, pressing down, as if trying to get a better look, or perhaps trying to force its way in. Then through the blurring sheets of rain I saw it. 2 points, glinting faintly, reflecting the emergency lights of the dashboard. They weren't round. They weren't like human eyes. They were elongated, vertical slits like a cat's, but far, far larger. And they glowed with a faint, malevolent yellow light. My heart stopped. Literally. For a beat, it just ceased to function. Then it kicked back into overdrive, a frantic, painful tattoo against my ribs. Those eyes, they weren't looking at me. They were looking into me. They were ancient, predatory, filled with an intelligence that was both terrifying and utterly alien. I finally found my voice, or what was left of it. A choked gasp escaped my lips, a pathetic, strangled sound lost in the storm. The eyes, those dreadful yellow slits, seemed to narrow just a fraction, as if they had heard me. Or perhaps, as if they had censored my terror. A low, guttural rumble vibrated through the roof of the car. A sound that wasn't quite a growl, not quite a purr, but something far more primal and chilling. It was a sound that spoke of immense power, of ancient hunger, of something that belonged in the darkest nightmares, not in the middle of a deserted road in Ashwood County. My mind finally snapped. The paralysis broke. Flight or fight. And right now, flight was the only option. My foot slammed down on the accelerator. The engine, which had mercifully remained running, roared to life, protesting the sudden burst of power from a standstill. The tires spun on the wet asphalt, squealing in defiance. The car lurched forward, then backward, then forward again as I fumbled with the gear stick, my hand shaking so violently I could barely grip it. First reverse. I slammed it into drive. The car shot forward, tires spitting water and gravel as it fishtailed wildly on the slick road. The sudden movement, the violent acceleration, threw whatever was on the roof off balance. I heard a shriek, high-pitched and inhuman, a sound that scraped against my eardrums and burrowed into the deepest parts of my brain. It was a sound of rage, of surprise, of something utterly furious at being dislodged. The car swerved violently, my hands wrestling with the steering wheel, trying to regain control. I glanced up, just for a split second, and saw a massive dark shape silhouetted against the meager light of the distant streetlights, tumbling off the back of my car. It hit the road with a sickening thud that shook the entire vehicle, a sound that would haunt my sleep for years to come. I didn't stop. I couldn't. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, to put as much distance as possible between myself and whatever had just been on my roof. My foot remained pressed to the floor, the speedometer needle climbing steadily as the old sedan strained against the wind and the rain. I looked in the rearview mirror, my heart still pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, expecting to see it scrambling after me, those yellow eyes burning holes through the darkness. But there was nothing, just the swirling sheets of rain, reflecting my own terrified face in the glass. I kept driving, the emergency lights of the dashboard casting an eerie glow on my face, illuminating the sweat and the tears that mingled on my cheeks. I didn't care where I was going, just that it was away. Away from Ashwood County. Away from that thing. My phone, which had been dead for hours, suddenly flickered to life, its screen blazing with notifications. A missed call from my friend Jessica, a text from my brother Michael, and a dozen alerts from local news outlets, all centered on Ashwood County. I ignored them all. My only focus was the road ahead, and the desperate need to escape. The rain began to subside, slowly at first, then more rapidly, until it was just a light drizzle. The storm was passing, but the storm inside me raged on. My hands were still shaking, my body trembling uncontrollably. I drove for what felt like an eternity. The images of those glowing yellow eyes burned into my retina, the sound of that inhuman shriek echoing in my ears. Finally, I saw a familiar sign. Welcome to Fairview, population 15,000. Civilization. Safety. I pulled into the first gas station I saw, my car sputtering to a halt next to a brightly lit pump. I cut the engine, and the sudden silence was almost as terrifying as the earlier noise. My hands were still locked on the steering wheel, my body rigid. I forced myself to breathe deep, shuddering breaths that did little to calm my racing heart. I finally managed to pry my fingers from the wheel, my knuckles aching. My entire body was sore, stiff from the prolonged tension. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers clumsy. I needed to call someone. Anyone. I scrolled through my contacts, my mind a jumble of fear and adrenaline. Jessica. Michael. My parents. Who would believe me? Who would listen to a story about a monstrous creature with glowing yellow eyes in the middle of nowhere? My eyes fell on the news alerts on my phone. I had ignored them earlier, but now a morbid curiosity gripped me. I tapped on the first one. Local man missing in Ashwood County. The headline sent a fresh chill down my spine. Ashwood County. I clicked on the article, my heart thumping. It was a local farmer, David Miller, who had gone missing earlier that evening. His truck was found abandoned on a deserted stretch of Route 17, the very road I had been on. The article mentioned strange claw marks on the vehicle, and a disturbed patch of earth nearby. Claw marks. My blood ran cold again. I had to check my car. I had to see. I slowly opened the car door, the hinges groaning in protest. The air was cool, damp, still smelling of rain and earth. I walked around to the back of the car, my steps tentative, my eyes scanning the ground, expecting to see. What? A shadow? A footprint? Nothing. Just wet asphalt. I ran my hand over the roof of the car, my fingers trembling. The metal was cold and slick. But as I reached the front, just above the windshield, my fingers brushed against something rough, something gouged. I leaned in closer, straining my eyes in the dim light of the gas station. There they were. Deep, parallel furrows in the paint, scraped down to the bare metal. Not one or two, but a series of them, wide and uneven, as if something with immense, powerful claws had tried to dig into the roof, or perhaps, had used it as a purchase point. They were too wide, too deep to be human. My stomach churned. This wasn't a nightmare. This was real. Whatever had been on my car, whatever had looked at me with those terrifying yellow eyes, it had left its mark. I stumbled back, leaning against the gas pump for support, my legs suddenly weak. The implications crashed down on me, heavy and suffocating. David Miller. Missing. Claw marks on his truck. And now, claw marks on my car. Ashwood County. The name echoed in my mind, no longer just a place on a map, but a chilling whisper of untold horrors. I had escaped it, but what about David? What about all the others who might have passed through? A new terrifying thought solidified in my mind. What if it hadn't been trying to get in? What if it had been trying to get off? What if I had driven through something, an unholy barrier, and whatever was on my car had been riding along, a silent, terrifying hitchhiker, until the storm had given it the opportunity to reveal itself? The thought was almost worse than the initial terror. It implied a deliberate, patient malevolence, something that existed in the shadows, waiting for its moment. And I had stumbled right into its path. I stared at the claw marks on my car, then at my phone, the news article still open. David Miller. Ashwood County. The pieces of a horrifying puzzle were starting to click into place, forming a picture far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. My encounter wasn't just a random act of terror. It was part of something bigger, something deeply unsettling that had its roots firmly planted in the cursed soil of Ashwood County. And I had just barely escaped becoming another one of its forgotten victims. The world outside my car window was a blur of blacktop and encroaching darkness. My hands were locked white-knuckled on the steering wheel, my foot pressed to the floor, pushing the old sedan to speeds I usually reserved for open highways, not winding back roads. Every shadow seemed to stretch and writhe. Every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps behind me. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a pair of headlights, or worse, a shadowy figure emerging from the gloom. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the car, broken only by the roar of the engine and my own ragged breathing. I didn't know how long I drove, only that I kept going until the gas gauge dipped dangerously low and the familiar glow of a highway sign, announcing an actual town with actual normal people, finally appeared. It was a small, dusty truck stop on the outskirts of Elm Creek, a town so unremarkable it felt like a beacon of sanity after Ashwood County. I pulled into the brightly lit parking lot, my muscles screaming in protest as I finally eased my foot off the accelerator. The car idled, its engine ticking, a stark contrast to the silence that had filled my head for what felt like an eternity. For a long moment I just sat there, the fluorescent lights of the gas station sign reflecting off my windshield, a distorted halo around my trembling hands. My whole body ached, not from any physical injury, but from the sheer unbridled terror that had gripped me. My mind replayed the images, the flickering firelight, the hooded figures, the chilling cadence of their voices, the scent of something metallic and ancient in the air. It was all too real, too vivid. But as the adrenaline slowly began to recede, an insidious whisper started in the back of my mind. What had I really seen? I was lost, disoriented, exhausted, and running on fumes, both literally and figuratively. Could it have been some kind of rural prank gone horribly wrong? A group of misguided teenagers in robes playing a sick joke? My rational brain, desperate to find a less terrifying explanation, tried to construct an alternative narrative. Maybe the cold and the fear had made me hallucinate. Maybe I'd stumbled onto some kind of strange theatrical performance, and my mind, already on edge, had twisted it into something far more sinister. I needed to call someone. My sister Sarah, my best friend David. But what would I even say? Hey, I just escaped a human sacrifice ritual in a county that doesn't exist on most maps? They'd think I'd gone completely mad. Even to my own ears, the words sounded insane. I closed my eyes, trying to clear my head, to separate fact from the terrifying fiction my mind seemed determined to create. But then the details pushed back. The way the leader's voice had resonated, deep and guttural, not like a teenager's at all. The absolute stillness of the air, the way the firelight had danced on their faces, revealing not youthful mischief, but something ancient and unyielding. And the smell, that cloying metallic, almost sweet scent that had clung to the air like a shroud. No, this wasn't a prank. This wasn't a hallucination. This was real, and it was horrifying. I finally managed to push open the car door, my legs feeling like jelly as I stumbled out. The crisp night air, free from the stench of Ashwood, felt like a cleansing breath. I walked into the brightly lit convenience store. The mundane fluorescent hum and the cheerful jingle of the door a stark contrast to the darkness I just left behind. I bought a coffee, black and strong, and a sugary snack, hoping the caffeine and sugar would jolt my system back to some semblance of normalcy. As I sat at a small, wobbly table in the corner, nursing the scalding coffee, my phone felt heavy in my hand. I couldn't call Sarah or David. Not yet. I needed answers first. I needed to know I wasn't crazy. My fingers, still trembling slightly, typed Ashwood County into the search bar. The initial results were sparse, just as I'd found before. A few outdated census records, an old Wikipedia stub mentioning its declining population and agricultural economy. Nothing about hooded figures or ancient rituals. But I kept digging, scrolling past the official entries, venturing into the deeper, murkier waters of the internet. And then I found it. Not on a mainstream news site or a government database, but buried deep in an old, defunct local history forum from the early 2000s. A thread titled, Ashwood County's Dark Secret. I clicked on it, my heart beginning to pound again. A different kind of beat this time. One of morbid curiosity mixed with dread. The first few posts were typical forum chatter. Anyone else hear weird stories about Ashwood? My grandpa always said never to stop there. Then came the more specific details. An anonymous user, going by the handle TruthSeeker77, had posted a long, rambling account. They spoke of the county's isolation, its fiercely private residents, and a local legend about an ancient pact made long ago to ensure bountiful harvests, a pact that demanded a tithe. The post described strange disappearances over the decades, people who had ventured into Ashwood County and simply vanished without a trace. The local sheriff's department, according to TruthSeeker77, was either complicit or utterly useless, always chalking it up to people getting lost or just moving on. Another user, Rural Explorer, chimed in, recalling a camping trip near the county line years ago. They mentioned hearing low, rhythmic chanting drifting from the woods at night and seeing strange lights in the distance. They dismissed it at the time as some kind of eccentric local gathering, but the memory had stuck with them. The forum post didn't explicitly mention the harvest or the specific details I had witnessed, but the undertones were chillingly similar. Ancient pacts, tithe, disappearances. It all resonated with the terrifying tableau I'd stumbled upon. The pieces were starting to fit, forming a picture far more sinister than any rural myth. My gaze drifted to the missing person flyer I'd seen back at the gas station near the county line. Jessica Miller, a young woman just like me, who had disappeared in the vicinity of Ashwood County. Could she have been one of them? Another tithe? The thought sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. Suddenly, this wasn't just a terrifying experience I had escaped. It was a pattern, a horrifying, ongoing pattern. The coffee had grown cold, and the sugar rush had long since faded, replaced by a dull ache behind my eyes. I was exhausted, terrified, and now consumed by a burning need to understand. I could try to forget it. I could drive home, lock my doors, and pretend Ashwood County didn't exist. But the images were seared into my mind, the cold fear still clinging to my soul. And the thought of Jessica Miller, and all the others who had vanished, weighed heavily on me. I had seen something real, and now I couldn't unsee it. The decision solidified in that dimly lit truck stop. I wasn't just a victim who had escaped. I was a witness. And if no one else was going to look into the darkness festering in Ashwood County, then I had to. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was now tempered by a fierce resolve. I had to find out what was happening there. I had to know if Jessica Miller was still alive, or if she had indeed become part of their grotesque harvest. But first, I needed to gather more information to understand the true depth of the evil I had encountered. And as I scrolled further down the old forum thread, a new post dated only a few weeks ago caught my eye. It was from a user named Ashwood Watcher, and it simply read, "They know when you've seen too much. Don't go back. Don't even think about going back." The warning was chilling, but it was already too late. I was already thinking about it, and a strange, almost defiant urge was pulling me back towards the very place I had so desperately tried to escape. The warning was chilling, but it was already too late. I was already thinking about it, and a strange, almost defiant urge was pulling me back towards the very place I had so desperately tried to escape. My hands, still gripping the steering wheel, felt a tremor of uncertainty, but my foot, without conscious command, pressed harder on the accelerator, not away but towards. The highway signs, which moments ago had screamed escape, now seemed to whisper a different kind of promise, the promise of answers, however terrifying they might be. It was a bizarre sensation, as if an invisible tether, anchored deep within Ashwood County, had simply reeled me back in. My logical mind screamed at me to keep driving, to forget the old man's words, to ignore the unsettling feeling that had clung to me like a shroud. But defiance, mixed with a potent cocktail of morbid curiosity and an inexplicable sense of responsibility, had taken the wheel. I had to know. I couldn't just leave, not when an entire county felt like a question mark hanging in the air, a whisper of untold stories. The sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and bruised purple as I made the U-turn that sealed my fate. The road, which had felt like a lifeline just an hour ago, now stretched before me like a dark, inviting tunnel. The trees on either side seemed taller, their shadows longer, as if they were leaning in, eager spectators to my foolish return. Each mile marker I passed, counting down the distance to Ashwood, felt like a step deeper into a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. The air grew colder, even with the windows up, and a prickle of unease crawled up my spine. Was it just my imagination, or did the silence outside the car's hum feel heavier, more profound than before? As the "Welcome to Ashwood County" sign loomed into view once again, this time bathed in the fading light of dusk, it didn't feel like a welcome at all. It felt like a boundary crossed, a line irrevocably breached. The paint on the sign, which I hadn't noticed before, seemed faded and peeling, the letters themselves looking ancient and worn, as if they had stood sentinel for centuries, watching countless travelers pass and perhaps stop. I drove slowly now, the urgency of escape replaced by a cautious reconnaissance. The towns within Ashwood County, which had been a blur on my initial drive-through, now began to take on individual, eerie characteristics. The first town, Havenwood, seemed utterly deserted. Storefronts were boarded up, windows dark and vacant, reflecting the dying light like dead eyes. A single rusted swing set stood motionless in a small park, its chains creaking faintly in the gentle breeze. a sound that carried too far in the pervasive silence. It was a ghost town, not just abandoned but seemingly forgotten. I continued through Havenwood, the only sound the crunch of my tires on the sparsely graveled road. My gaze darted from one decaying building to another, searching for any sign of life, any explanation for the profound emptiness. Then I saw it. Tucked away on a side street, half hidden by overgrown bushes, was a small, unassuming diner. Its neon sign, The Daily Grind, flickered erratically, casting a sickly green glow onto the cracked pavement. A single beat-up pickup truck was parked outside, and a faint stream of light emanated from within. It was the first sign of human activity I had encountered since re-entering Ashwood County. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it, a chance to find answers or at least to gather more questions. I pulled my car slowly into the gravel lot, parking a discreet distance from the pickup truck. As I cut the engine, the sudden silence was deafening, amplifying the faint hum of the diner's flickering sign. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open my car door, the sound echoing in the stillness. The air outside was thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and faintly acrid, like old pennies. As I walked towards the diner, a chill wind swept through, rustling the dry leaves on the ground. The bell above the diner door jingled softly as I pushed it open, and the warmth inside was a welcome reprieve from the gathering cold. The interior was exactly what you'd expect from a small-town diner. A long counter with swivel stools, a few booths lining the walls, and a menu board listing classic American comfort food. But it was also eerily quiet. Only one person sat at the counter, a man with his back to me, nursing a coffee. Behind the counter, a woman with tired eyes was wiping down the chrome, her movements slow and methodical. "Welcome to the daily grind," she said, her voice flat, devoid of any real enthusiasm. She didn't look up immediately. "Thanks," I replied, trying to sound casual, despite the frantic beat of my heart. I slid onto a stool a few seats away from the other customer. "Just coffee for now, please." She nodded, poured a cup, and placed it in front of me without a word. Her gaze, when it finally met mine, was a strange mix of resignation and something akin to pity. It was the same look I had seen in the old man's eyes at the gas station. That look, more than anything, confirmed I had made a mistake coming back. The other customer at the counter finally stirred. He was a burly man, perhaps in his late 40s, with a thick beard and calloused hands. He took a slow sip of his coffee, then turned his head, his eyes, dark and unreadable, settling on me. "You're not from around here, are you?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. It wasn't a question, but a statement. "No," I admitted. "Just passing through." Or while I was decided to stop for a bit. He grunted, a sound that could have meant anything. Not many folks stop in Ashwood County these days. He paused, his gaze unwavering. "Most just keep driving." The words hung in the air, a stark echo of the warning I had received. "Yeah, I heard that," I said, trying for a light tone that didn't quite land. "But I was curious. This place, it's certainly quiet." The woman behind the counter let out a soft, humorless laugh. "Quiet is one word for it." She leaned against the counter, her arms crossed. "Been getting quieter for years. Folks just leave. Or worse." My blood ran cold. "Worse?" I prompted, my voice barely a whisper. The burly man at the counter shifted, turning fully towards me now. "You should listen to the warnings, kid. Ashwood ain't like other places. There's things here, things that don't like to be disturbed. Things that don't like folks poking around." He took another slow sip of his coffee, his eyes never leaving mine. "You got a reason to be here?" I hesitated. How much could I say? How much should I say? I just had a strange feeling, like there was something I missed, something I needed to understand. The woman snorted. "Understanding ain't gonna do you any good here, honey. Just gonna get you tangled up." "Tangled up in what?" I pressed, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "What exactly is going on in Ashwood County?" The burly man set his coffee cup down with a soft clink. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper, though there was no one else in the diner to hear us. "There's a reason this county is dying, a reason no one stays, and a reason the roads are so empty. It's not just economic decline, not just folks moving to the city. Something older. Something hungry." He paused, letting the word hang heavy in the air. The flickering neon sign outside cast long, dancing shadows across his face, making his features seem even more menacing. "You see that old church down the road? The one with the broken steeple just past the cemetery?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly. I nodded, remembering a dilapidated stone structure I had glimpsed on my way in, half hidden by dense foliage. It had looked ancient, forgotten. "That church ain't just old. It's the heart of it all, where the lines between here and somewhere else get thin, and every so often something slips through." He paused again, his eyes wide and dark. "They used to say the town elders kept it contained, kept the balance. But the elders are gone now. All gone. And whatever they were holding back, it's been let loose." A shiver ran down my spine, a cold dread far worse than any of the old man's warnings. This wasn't just about a strange feeling. It was about something truly sinister. What slipped through?" I managed to ask, my throat suddenly dry. The man shook his head slowly. "No one knows for sure. No one who's seen it up close has ever lived to tell. But it leaves its mark. A coldness, a silence, and a hunger that never gets satisfied." He pushed his empty coffee cup away. "You want my advice? Finish your coffee, get back in your car, and don't look back. Don't even think about that church. Especially not after dark." He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor, a jarring sound in the quiet diner. He tossed a few crumpled bills onto the counter without a glance at the woman, then headed for the door. As his hand reached for the doorknob, he turned back one last time, his eyes boring into mine. "Some things are best left unknown. Ashwood County has a way of making sure of that. It collects its dues." Then he was gone, the jingle of the bell quickly fading into the oppressive silence. I was left alone with the tired-eyed woman, the flickering neon sign, and the chilling words of the burly man echoing in my ears. The church, the broken steeple, something hungry. My mind raced, piecing together the fragments of warnings. It was a local legend, a terrifying myth, yet the conviction in his voice, and the woman's solemn nod, made it feel undeniably real. I looked down at my coffee, now cold and uninviting. I had come back for answers, and now I had a new terrifying lead. The church, and a strange, unshakable compulsion to go there, to see what secrets it held, despite every fiber of my being screaming at me to run. The darkness outside, which had been merely the end of the day, now felt like a living, breathing entity waiting. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the night was just beginning. The darkness outside, which had been merely the end of the day, now felt like a living, breathing entity waiting. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the night was just beginning. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat echoing in the sudden, profound silence of the motel room. The cheap curtains, drawn tight, did little to block out the oppressive void beyond the window. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to bolt, to run until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. But where would I go? My car was still out there, possibly sabotaged, certainly not safe. The road, as the old man had warned, was no sanctuary. Ashwood County had me in its grasp, and the grip was tightening with every passing second. I fumbled for my phone, a desperate, futile gesture. The screen glowed, mocking me with its persistent no-service message. It was a digital tombstone, marking the death of my connection to the outside world, to sanity. I tried calling 911, an instinctual reaction, but the call wouldn't even initiate. The network was dead, utterly and completely. I was truly alone. A cold sweat pricked my skin despite the stale warmth of the motel room. I moved to the door, checking the flimsy lock. It felt laughably inadequate, a child's toy against the nameless dread that seeped through the walls. I dragged a heavy, worn armchair in front of it, a pathetic barricade, but it was all I had. Logic warred with instinct. My rational mind tried to dismiss the old man's words as the ramblings of a hermit, the strange occurrences as coincidences, the fear as mere exhaustion and overactive imagination. But the prickling sensation on my neck, the visceral terror that pulsed through my veins, refused to be silenced. This wasn't just my imagination. This was real. I paced the small room, a caged animal, my gaze darting to every shadow, every corner. The air felt heavy, charged with an unseen presence. It was the kind of silence that wasn't empty, but pregnant with unspoken threats. I tried to focus, to think. What had the old man said? They don't like outsiders. The woods, they watch. Don't stop in Ashwood. The word circled in my mind, a chilling mantra. and the newspaper clipping the disappearances. Emily Jenkins, David Miller, Saracen, all gone without a trace. All from Ashwood County. I pulled the crinkled newsprint from my pocket, unfolding it with trembling fingers. The grainy photos stared up at me, the faces of the missing frozen in time, forever hopeful, forever lost. I scanned the dates, the details, all within the last 5 years, clustered around the same time of year, late autumn, early winter. Just like now, a pattern, not random, deliberate. As I stared at the faces, a faint scratching sound echoed from outside the window. It was subtle, almost like twigs brushing against the pane, but there was a rhythm to it, an unnatural persistence. My breath hitched. I froze, every nerve ending screaming. It stopped, then started again, closer this time and undeniably deliberate. Asterisk, scratch, scratch, scratch. Asterisk. My eyes were glued to the curtain, my muscles tensed, ready to spring, though I had no idea where I would go or what I would do. I wanted to rip the curtain open to see what was there, but a deeper primal fear held me back. What if I saw something? What if it saw me? The scratching continued for another agonizing minute, then abruptly ceased. The silence that followed was even more terrifying than the sound itself. Felt like judgment, like waiting. I backed away from the window, my heart thumping against my ribs so hard I thought it might burst. I needed to get out of this room. I needed to find someone, anyone who wasn't part of this nightmare. But who? The few people I'd seen in town hadn't exactly been welcoming. The woman at the diner, the sullen gas station attendant, the old man who had warned me away. They all seemed to share a collective secret, a silent agreement to let Ashwood devour its own, and anyone foolish enough to stumble into its path. My gaze fell upon the small, dusty Bible on the nightstand, a forgotten relic of countless previous guests. I picked it up, the worn leather cool against my palm. It offered no comfort, no solace, only a stark reminder of how utterly powerless I felt. I needed answers. I needed to understand what was happening, even if it meant risking everything. The fear was paralyzing, but the unknown was worse. I remembered the general store. The old man, Arthur, had been specific in his warning, but he had also spoken of them. Not just the woods, but something more. Something that watched. Maybe there was something in his store, something he'd kept, a clue. Or maybe I was just grasping at straws, desperate for any shred of hope. Against every instinct of self-preservation, I knew I couldn't stay locked in that room, waiting for whatever was outside to find a way in. The thought of venturing back into the Ashwood night was pure agony, but the thought of remaining a trapped target was unbearable. I needed to move. I needed to act. I pulled on my jacket, grabbed my car keys, a useless gesture given the state of my vehicle, but it was a familiar comfort. I moved silently to the door, my hand on the flimsy deadbolt. The barricade of the armchair felt even more pathetic now. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, I slid the bolt back, my ears straining for any sound from the hallway. Nothing. Just the oppressive silence. I eased the door open just a crack, peering into the dimly lit corridor. The motel was eerily quiet. No sounds of other guests, no distant television, no hum of appliances. It was as if I was the only soul left in the entire building. The air in the hallway felt colder, heavier than in my room, carrying a faint earthy scent, like damp soil and something else. Something metallic, almost like old blood. Stepping out, I pulled the door shut softly behind me, not bothering to lock it. What was the point? I moved down the corridor, my footsteps unnaturally loud in the profound silence. Each shadow seemed to lengthen, to twist into distorted shapes, mimicking unseen figures. My heart pounded, a relentless drum against my ribs. I reached the lobby, the small empty space lit by a single flickering fluorescent light that hummed a low, unsettling tune. The reception desk was deserted, the bell sitting untouched. I pushed open the heavy glass door leading outside. A blast of frigid night air hitting me. The moon was a sliver, mostly obscured by heavy, low-hanging clouds, casting the town in a murky, terrifying gloom. The streetlights, few and far between, cast long, distorted shadows that danced with the bare branches of the trees. The town of Ashwood was not just asleep, it was dead. Or perhaps it was merely pretending to be. The general store was a few blocks away, a beacon of flickering neon, the only sign of life in the entire town. As I walked, every creak of the old wooden buildings, every rustle of leaves, every distant hoot of an owl sent jolts of pure terror through me. I kept my gaze fixed on the ground ahead, refusing to look into the deeper shadows, refusing to acknowledge the feeling of being watched, from the windows of the silent houses, from the depths of the surrounding woods. I reached the general store, its faded sign, Arthur's Provisions, barely legible in the dim light. The front door was still unlocked, just as it had been earlier. A shiver ran down my spine. Had Arthur left it open? Or was it always open? A silent invitation to something unseen? I pushed it inward, the bell above jingling loudly, the sound echoing in the cavernous, dusty interior. "Arthur!" I called out, my voice barely a whisper, swallowed by the oppressive silence. No answer. The scent of old wood, dust, and something faintly sweet, like forgotten spices, hung in the air. The store was exactly as I remembered it. Cluttered shelves, ancient merchandise, a sense of time standing still. But now, in the dead of night, it felt ominous, like a stage set for a horror play. I moved deeper into the store, my eyes scanning the shelves, looking for anything out of place, any clue. My gaze fell on the small counter where Arthur had stood. Beneath it, half hidden by a stack of old newspapers, I saw something. A small leather-bound journal. It looked old, worn, its pages yellowed with age. This was not something a shopkeeper would normally leave lying around. My heart hammered with a mixture of fear and a strange, desperate hope. This had to be it. This had to be what Arthur had been hinting at, something he couldn't say aloud. I reached for it, my fingers trembling as they closed around the cool leather. As I pulled it out, a faint scratching sound, identical to the one outside my motel window, echoed from the back of the store. I froze, the journal clutched tight in my hand. The sound was closer now, not outside but inside the store. It was coming from the back room, beyond the faded curtain that separated the main shop from what I assumed was Arthur's living quarters. My breath caught in my throat. I stood absolutely still, straining to hear. The scratching stopped. Then a low, guttural growl, a sound that was less animal and more something else, something ancient and hungry, rumbled from behind the curtain. My blood ran cold. Every instinct screamed at me to drop the journal and run. But something held me there, a morbid fascination, a desperate need to know. The growl came again, closer this time, followed by the distinct sound of something heavy dragging across the floor. The curtain billowed slightly, as if pushed from behind. I could almost feel the presence of whatever was back there, a palpable malevolence that seeped into my very bones. I knew with a terrifying certainty that I was no longer alone in Arthur's store, and whatever was behind that curtain was not Arthur. My breath hitched, a ragged gasp caught in my throat. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to bolt for the door and never look back, but my feet felt rooted to the creaking floorboards. The air grew heavy, thick with an unseen pressure that pushed down on my chest, making each inhale a struggle. I could hear nothing but the frantic drumming of my own heart against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that seemed to pound in my ears, drowning out all other sounds. The curtain, a faded, stained tapestry that had once depicted some pastoral scene now utterly obscured by grime, rippled. Not a gentle sway from a draft, but a deliberate, almost expectant movement, as if something had brushed against it from the other side. A sliver of deeper shadow, impossibly dark, seemed to bleed from the gap where the curtain met the wall, stretching like a hungry tendril across the floor towards my feet. My eyes, wide and unblinking, were fixed on that spot, waiting for whatever unspeakable horror was about to emerge. Panic was a cold, sharp blade pressing against my spine. My hand instinctively flew to my pocket, searching for my phone, but then I remembered the dead signal, the oppressive silence of Ashwood County that swallowed all modern conveniences. There was no one to call, no one to hear me scream. I was utterly, terrifyingly alone. A low, guttural sound like a deep rumble from within the earth vibrated through the floorboards. It wasn't a growl, not exactly, but something far more ancient and unsettling. A sound that resonated with the primal fear buried deep within humanity. It was the sound of something old, something that predated the town, predated human understanding. My gaze darted around the cluttered store, desperately searching for an escape, a weapon, anything. The front door, still ajar, seemed miles away. The counter, laden with forgotten trinkets and dusty goods, offered no solace. My eyes landed on the small, wooden stool Arthur usually perched on behind the counter, now overturned. A stray piece of paper had fluttered from beneath it, partially obscured by a stack of moth-eaten magazines. It was a distraction, a brief reprieve from the impending horrors behind the curtain, but my mind latched onto it. Perhaps it was a clue, a note, a desperate message from Arthur. The thought, however fleeting, was enough to break the paralysis. I took one shaky step, then another, my every nerve screaming at me to turn and flee. But a strange, morbid curiosity, or perhaps a desperate hope, compelled me forward. As I moved, the curtain rippled again, more violently this time. A faint, sickeningly sweet stench, like decaying flowers and something metallic, drifted from behind it. It was the smell of death, but not quite. It was something wrong. My stomach churned, bile rising in my throat. I reached the counter, my fingers fumbling for the paper. It was a single sheet, torn from a spiral notebook, scrawled with Arthur's familiar shaky handwriting. The words were erratic, almost frantic, as if written in haste and terror. They're coming for me. Can't hide anymore. The old ways. The pact. It demands. The others gone. Sarah, Daniel, Emily, Michael, all gone. The harvest. Don't let it take you. The well. The heart of it. It calls. It always calls. The woods. The symbols. They mark the path. They hide the truth. Don't look back. Don't look behind the curtain. It sees. It waits. It feeds. My blood ran cold. The names. Sarah, Daniel, Emily, Michael. These were the names of the missing people I'd heard about. The ones whose faces adorned the faded posters in the diner. Arthur hadn't just been a local merchant. He had been a witness, a victim, or perhaps something far more entangled. The harvest. The pact. The old ways. It all clicked into place with horrifying clarity, painting a picture not of isolated disappearances, but of a systematic, ancient horror. And then the last line. Don't look behind the curtain. It sees. It waits. It feeds. The paper trembled in my hand, crinkling softly. The sound seemed to echo in the sudden, profound silence that had fallen over the store. The low rumble from behind the curtain had ceased. The curtain itself was still, a dark, impenetrable barrier. But the silence now felt heavier, more oppressive than any sound. A predatory quiet that suggested I was being watched, observed, assessed. I slowly lifted my head, my eyes drawn to the curtain once more. It was no longer just a barrier. It was a veil, separating me from an unimaginable terror. My mind raced, trying to process Arthur's frantic message. The well, the heart of it. It calls. Could he be talking about the old well I'd seen on the map, the one marked with that strange ancient symbol? The one near the edge of the woods that bordered the county line? But before I could dwell on the implications, a new sound emerged from behind the curtain. It was softer this time, a faint scraping like something dragging across the floor. Then a wet, squelching noise. And then a series of soft, rhythmic thumps, like something heavy being moved, or perhaps bouncing. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure terror. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that whatever was back there was no longer static. It was moving. It was coming closer. My gaze flickered to the front door, still ajar. It was my only chance. But the thought of turning my back on whatever unspeakable thing lurked behind that curtain filled me with an icy dread. What if it was faster than I was? What if it knew I was about to flee? I clutched Arthur's note tighter, its frantic words burning into my mind. Don't look back. Don't look behind the curtain. But how could I not? Every fiber of my being screamed at me to understand, to see, even as another part of me pleaded for blissful ignorance. A dark, elongated shadow began to stretch from beneath the curtain, reaching out like a grasping claw. It wasn't the shadow of a human hand, or even an animal paw. It was too long, too skeletal, and it moved with an unnatural jerky motion. It seemed to writhe independent of any visible source, growing longer, reaching closer to my feet. My breath hitched again. This was it, the moment of truth. I couldn't stay. I couldn't run blindly. But what could I do? My eyes darted to the counter again, frantically searching for anything. My gaze fell upon something small and metallic, half hidden beneath a dusty old ledger. It was a tarnished silver locket, intricately carved with the same strange, spiraling symbol I'd seen on the county line sign, and the one Arthur mentioned in his note, the symbol of Ashwood County. As my fingers closed around the locket, a sudden blinding flash of images assaulted my mind. Not my memories, but something alien, ancient, terrifying. I saw fleeting glimpses of shadowed figures in the deep woods, chanting under a blood-red moon. I saw the faces of Sarah, Daniel, Emily, Michael contorted in silent screams, their eyes wide with unspeakable horror. I saw the old well, not as a crumbling stone structure, but as a gaping maw in the earth, its depths swirling with an unholy light. And at the heart of it all, a formless, shifting entity, a hunger, a void consuming everything. The images vanished as quickly as they came, leaving me gasping for air, my head throbbing with a searing pain. The locket felt scorching hot in my palm. It wasn't just a symbol. It was a key, a conduit, a piece of something far older and more sinister than I could have ever imagined. And then the curtain was torn open. Not slowly, not tentatively, but with a violent, ripping sound that echoed through the small store like a thunderclap. The fabric shredded, revealing the darkness beyond. And in that darkness, something stirred. It wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was a grotesque mockery of both, a twisted amalgamation of shadow and bone, impossibly tall and gaunt, its limbs unnaturally elongated and jointed at odd angles. Its skin, if it could be called skin, was a mottled tapestry of gray and black, stretched taut over what looked like exposed sinew and bone. It had no discernible face, only a swirling vortex of deeper shadow where its features should have been. A void that seemed to pull in all light, all hope. But I could feel its gaze, a searing, malevolent presence that pierced directly into my soul. It was the embodiment of the malevolence I had felt, the hunger Arthur had written about. It was the thing that fed. A low, rasping sound like dry leaves skittering across stone emanated from the swirling void that was its face. It was a sound that articulated no words, yet conveyed a chilling message of ancient, insatiable hunger. It took a step forward, its impossibly long, spindly leg emerging from the darkness, followed by another. Each step was accompanied by that sickening wet squelch and a faint, rhythmic thump, as if something was dragging or being dragged behind it. I didn't wait to see what it was. The paralysis shattered, replaced by an adrenaline-fueled surge of pure, unadulterated terror. My legs finally obeyed, propelling me backwards, away from the monstrosity. I stumbled over an overturned crate, nearly falling, but managed to regain my balance, my eyes still fixed on the horror that was relentlessly advancing. The front door. It was my only hope. I turned, scrambling blindly towards the exit, Arthur's note still clutched in one hand, the burning locket in the other. The creature was behind me now. I could feel its oppressive presence, hear the sickening sounds of its movement growing closer with every frantic stride I took. The air grew colder, the scent of decay stronger. I burst through the door, out into the twilight, gasping for breath, my lungs burning. The cool evening air was a shock to my system, but it offered no comfort. The silence of Ashwood County was still there, vast and consuming, but now it felt different. It felt like a trap, carefully set, and I had just walked deeper into its jaws. I didn't stop to look back, not even for a second. Arthur's words echoed in my mind. Don't look back. I ran blindly, desperately, down the deserted main street, the sound of the creature's unnatural movements echoing behind me, growing louder, closer with every terrifying beat of my heart. I knew with a horrifying certainty that it was not just following me, it was hunting me, and Ashwood County was its hunting ground. I was no longer an observer, no longer a curious traveler. I was prey. The realization hit me like a physical blow, stripping away any last vestiges of my rational mind. My breath hitched, a ragged gasp caught in my throat. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to flee, to disappear. But where? Ashwood County was a cage, and I was trapped within its invisible bars. The darkness of the woods seemed to press in closer, no longer just a backdrop but an active participant in my impending doom. I scrambled back into my car, fumbling with the keys, my hands slick with sweat. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life, a sound that was both a blessing and a curse. It meant I could move, but it also announced my presence, a desperate beacon in the suffocating silence. I slammed the shifter into reverse, tires spitting gravel as I peeled out of the clearing, leaving the unsettling stillness of the whispering woods behind. Or so I hoped. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat urging me faster. The rearview mirror was a window into my terror. Shadows danced and stretched, morphing with the uneven terrain. But I saw nothing distinct, nothing tangible. Yet I felt it. A cold dread that seeped into my very bones, a palpable presence that clung to the air, a breath on the back of my neck even as I sped away. It wasn't just a feeling, it was a certainty. Whatever was out there, whatever had been watching, was now in motion, and it was coming for me. I drove blindly, the headlights carving a frantic path through the inky blackness. The narrow, winding roads of Ashwood County, once quaint and scenic, now felt like a labyrinth designed to trap me. The trees, thick and ancient, loomed on either side, their branches clawing at the sky, their shadows conspiring against me. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of the car, every flicker of light through the canopy sent a jolt of ice through my veins. I pressed the accelerator harder, the speedometer climbing, my focus solely on putting distance between myself and the unseen horror. But distance was a meaningless concept here. Ashwood County wasn't just a place. It felt like an entity itself, a living, breathing thing that was closing its grip around me. I tried to remember the way back to the main highway, to the sliver of normalcy I had foolishly abandoned. My mind, however, was a chaotic mess of fear and adrenaline. Every turn looked the same, every stretch of road indistinguishable from the last. The GPS on my phone, which had been spotty at best, now showed only a blank screen, a mocking symbol of my complete isolation. Panic began to set in, a cold, suffocating wave. I knew I couldn't outrun it indefinitely. I needed a plan, a destination, a place where I could at least try to understand what was happening. My thoughts raced back to the dilapidated general store, the only hint of civilization I had encountered since entering the county. Perhaps old man Silas, despite his cryptic warnings, knew something more. Or perhaps he was part of it all. The thought sent a fresh shiver down my spine, but it was the only option that presented itself. I veered sharply to the right, remembering a faded sign for Ashwood General Store 5 miles from earlier. The road became even rougher, punctuated by potholes that jarred the car and my teeth. The silence outside was broken only by the frantic hum of my engine and the terrified thumping of my heart. Then I heard it, a sound that was both subtle and utterly terrifying. A faint, almost imperceptible whisper, carried on the wind, just at the edge of hearing. It wasn't words, not exactly, but a low guttural murmur, like a predatory growl stretched thin across the vastness of the night. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, surrounding me, pressing in. I glanced wildly into the rearview mirror again. This time I saw something, or thought I did. A flicker, a distortion in the darkness behind me, like the air itself was rippling, shimmering, just beyond the reach of my headlights. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, leaving me questioning my own sanity. Was it just my fear playing tricks? Or was it truly there, gaining on me, a shapeless horror in the night? My foot slipped on the accelerator, and the car fishtailed slightly, sending a fresh surge of terror through me. I gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles white, eyes darting between the road ahead and the phantom presence behind. The whispers grew louder, clearer now, a chorus of hushed, unintelligible voices that seemed to resonate from the very trees themselves. They weren't speaking to me, but around me, a chilling cacophony that felt like the world itself was murmuring its disapproval, its judgment. Suddenly, a deer darted out from the tree line, directly into my path. I swerved violently, barely avoiding a collision, the car skidding dangerously close to the ditch. My heart leaped into my throat. As I corrected, my headlights momentarily swept across the woods to my left. And there it was. Not a shadow, not a distortion, but something wrong. It was tall, impossibly so, and impossibly thin, like a silhouette stretched beyond its natural limits. It was standing amongst the trees, partially obscured by the dense foliage, but I saw enough. Its form seemed to absorb the light, a deeper void in the already profound darkness. There were no discernible features, just an elongated, gaunt shape that seemed to ripple, as if made of smoke or disturbed air. And it was watching me. I felt the weight of its unseen gaze, a cold, calculating intensity that pierced through the glass, through the metal, straight into my soul. I screamed, a raw, primal sound that was instantly swallowed by the night. I slammed my foot down again, abandoning any pretense of caution. The car lurched forward, tires screaming in protest. I didn't dare look back again. I just drove, fueled by pure, unadulterated terror. The image was burned into my mind. That impossibly tall, impossibly thin, light-absorbing figure, standing silent and still, a sentinel of dread in the Ashwood night. The general store. I had to reach the general store. It was my only hope, my only destination. I rounded another bend, the headlights illuminating a familiar, if unsettling sight. The dilapidated building, its faded sign barely legible in the gloom. A faint flickering light emanated from within, a beacon in the oppressive darkness. I screeched to a halt in front of the store, slamming the car into park, leaving the engine running. I burst out of the car, not even bothering to shut the door, and sprinted towards the entrance. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but adrenaline propelled me forward. I yanked the door open, the old bell above chiming a rusty, mournful sound, a sharp contrast to the terror I carried. Silas was behind the counter, just as I remembered him, his face etched with a lifetime of hard living, his eyes still holding that unsettling, knowing glint. He looked up, his expression unreadable, as I stumbled inside, gasping for air, clutching my chest. "You shouldn't have stopped," he said, his voice a low rumble, devoid of surprise, devoid of warmth. "I told you, didn't I? Something out there," I choked out, pointing vaguely back towards the darkness I had just escaped. "I saw it. In the woods. It was hunting me." Silas just stared at me, his gaze unwavering, those ancient eyes seeming to peer into the very depths of my soul. He slowly shook his head. "It's not out there, stranger. It's everywhere. It is Ashwood County. It always has been." His words hit me harder than any physical blow. They resonated with a chilling truth that I had been desperately trying to deny. The whispers, the disappearances, the oppressive atmosphere, the sense of being watched. It wasn't just a local legend or a series of unfortunate events. It was a pervasive, malevolent force, intrinsically woven into the fabric of this cursed place. What is it?" I whispered, my voice barely audible, my eyes darting nervously towards the windows, expecting to see that elongated shadow pressing against the glass at any moment. Silas leaned forward, his elbows resting on the counter, his voice dropping to an even lower, more conspiratorial tone. "They call it many things. The Hollow Man, the Collector, the Whispering Shadow, but it doesn't matter what you call it. What matters is what it does." He paused, his eyes fixed on mine, a chilling intensity in their depths. "It feeds on fear, on isolation, on memory." Memory. The word hung in the air, heavy and ominous. I thought of the missing people, their lives erased, their stories untold. Was that what it collected? Their memories? Their very essence? "And once it has you in its sights," Silas continued, his voice a gravelly whisper that seemed to echo the whispers outside, "it doesn't let go. Not until it takes everything. Every thought, every feeling, every last trace of who you are." A cold dread, far deeper than the fear of physical harm, settled over me. It wasn't just my life it wanted. It was my very identity, my being. I was an empty vessel waiting to be drained. My mind raced, trying to process this horrifying revelation. The whispers outside seemed to intensify, a hungry chorus swirling around the old store, pressing against its fragile walls. "You came looking for answers," Silas said, a grim smile playing on his lips. "And now you have them. But some answers are best left buried. Some truths are too terrible to know." He pushed a worn, leather-bound journal across the counter towards me. It looked ancient, its pages yellowed and brittle. "This belonged to a man named David Miller. He came through here, about 20 years ago. Just like you. Asking questions. Getting too close." I stared at the journal, then back at Silas, a fresh wave of terror washing over me. David Miller. The name I'd seen on the missing persons flyer. The man who had disappeared in Ashwood County. "He thought he could fight it," Silas continued, his gaze drifting towards the dark windows. "He thought he could expose it. He was wrong. But he wrote it all down. Everything he learned, everything he saw, before it took him." My hand trembled as I reached for the journal. The cover felt cold, almost clammy, beneath my fingertips, as if it still held the chill of David Miller's final moments. This wasn't just a journal, it was a testament, a warning, a desperate cry from the grave. And Silas, the enigmatic store owner, had kept it hidden, waiting for someone foolish enough or desperate enough to walk into his store and claim their fate. The whispers outside surged, a frantic, hungry crescendo. The flickering light inside the store seemed to dim, casting long, dancing shadows that stretched and crawled across the shelves. I felt the presence again, closer now, pressing against the very structure of the building. It wasn't just outside, it was here. In the air, in the silence, in the chilling certainty that I had walked directly into its lair. I was no longer just prey. I was trapped, and the journal, David Miller's final legacy, felt like a lead weight in my trembling hands, sealing my fate in Ashwood County. I clutched the journal, my breath catching in my throat. The air grew colder, thick with a scent I couldn't place. Earth and something metallic, ancient and foul. My eyes darted around the cavernous chamber. It was vast, carved from the earth, not built. Strange, rudimentary carvings lined the rough-hewn walls, depicting figures that were half human, half something else, their limbs elongated, their faces distorted in silent screams or worship. This wasn't just a hideout. This was a sanctuary, prison, a tomb. I fumbled open the journal, my fingers slick with sweat. David Miller's frantic scrawl filled the pages, growing increasingly erratic towards the end. I had to know. I had to understand what I was up against, what Ashwood County truly was. His early entries were clinical, detailing the disappearances, the strange geological anomalies, the whispered legends. He spoke of an old settler's journal he'd found, dating back to the late 1700s, describing an unseen hunger in the woods, a presence that claimed the lost. "It's not a monster in the traditional sense," Miller had written, his handwriting surprisingly steady here. "It's an assimilation, a slow, insidious absorption. The land itself is not just inhabited by it. The land is it, or at least an extension of it." The early settlers, they knew. They made a pact, a ritual, to appease it, to keep it dormant. My blood ran cold. A pact? What kind of pact? I flipped pages, scanning for answers, my heart hammering against my ribs. Miller's entries grew more desperate. He detailed the breakdown of the pact. "The old families," he wrote, "the ones who knew the rituals, they died out or left. The new blood, they scoffed. They built roads, houses, trespassed on sacred ground. They disturbed it." He spoke of the veil thinning, of the entity's awareness growing. "It doesn't kill quickly," Miller had discovered. "It collects. It draws you in slowly, subtly. It twists your mind, warps your perception, until you want to stay. Until you become part of its tapestry." The disappearances, those aren't abductions. Those are transformations, completions. The ones who linger, who change, who seem off, they are the intermediate stages. They are the seeds it plants. A shiver traced down my spine. The vacant eyes of the gas station attendant, the unsettling stillness of the town, the old woman in the diner who stared a little too long. Were they all becoming? Miller's last coherent entries were a frantic race against time. He detailed his discovery of the entity's heart. Not a literal organ, but a nexus, a focal point of its power. "It's underground," he wrote, "deep beneath the old Miller farm. My farm. The family secret. The original pact was made here. A monument deep within a cavern. A stone pulsing with a faint, malevolent light. It's not just a stone. It's a conduit. A gate. Or perhaps a prison." He believed that if the conduit was disrupted, the entity would be weakened, perhaps even forced back into dormancy. But there was a catch. A terrible, terrifying catch. The pact required a sacrifice. Miller's words blurred, as if written through tears or blood. Not of life, not precisely, but of memory, of identity. The original families, they gave it something to chew on. They sustained it. When they stopped, it started taking back its due. And now it demands more. It demands everything. I heard a faint scraping sound from deeper within the chamber. My head snapped up, my flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive gloom. Nothing. Just shadows playing tricks. Or were they? I forced my eyes back to the journal. Miller had found a way to temporarily disrupt the conduit, but it required a very specific, very old, and very dangerous item. The Ashwood relic, he called it. Hidden by the original families, meant to be used only in direst emergencies. A blade forged from meteoric iron, imbued with protective sigils. It's not to kill it, no. It's to sever its connection, to force it to retreat, to close the gate. And then the chilling realization. The relic is hidden within the old Ashwood church, he wrote. The one they abandoned decades ago. The steeple. The bell tower. It's the only place it would be safe. The only place it couldn't reach, not fully. But it's protected by more than just locks. A cold dread settled over me. The abandoned church. The one I'd passed on my way into town. Its steeple a skeletal finger against the bruised sky. It wasn't just an old building. It was part of the story. Miller's hand had become almost illegible. It knows I'm here. It's surrounding me. The whispers, they're getting louder. They promise peace. They promise belonging. But I know what belonging means here. It means becoming it. His final entries were a desperate plea, a warning. If you find this, if you're still whole, you must understand. The conduit is its anchor. The relic is the key. But it's not a simple task. It will fight. It will tempt. It will show you your deepest fears. And the church, it's not empty. The ones who were almost fully assimilated, the ones who guard its secrets, they reside there. They are its eyes, its hands. My blood ran cold. The church was guarded, not by physical traps, but by those who had already fallen prey to Ashwood. The intermediate stages. The thought was horrifying. A low guttural moan echoed from the darkness. It wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was something primordial, something that clawed at the edges of sanity. The air grew heavy, thick with an unseen presence. My flashlight flickered, casting erratic, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe and stretch into monstrous shapes. I pressed myself against the damp rock wall, my heart a frantic drumbeat in my chest. It was here. It had found me. The silence had been a trick, a lullaby before the nightmare truly began. I could feel its gaze, a cold, probing sensation that prickled my skin and burrowed into my mind. It was testing me, measuring me. Miller's words rang in my ears. It doesn't kill quickly, it collects. Was it trying to collect me now? To assimilate me? I gripped the journal tighter, my knuckles white. There was no escape from this chamber, not without facing whatever lurked in the deeper shadows. The entrance I'd used was now just a darker patch in the gloom, seemingly miles away. The air thrummed with an unnatural energy, a low vibration that resonated in my bones. I had to move. I couldn't stay here waiting for it to finish whatever slow, terrifying process it had begun. The journal offered a desperate hope. The Ashwood relic. It was my only chance. But getting to the church and then into its bell tower seemed like an impossible feat, especially now. The moan came again, closer this time. A sound that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was a symphony of despair, a whisper of promises, a siren song of oblivion. My mind felt fuzzy at the edges, a strange lethargy creeping in. Was this how it started? The assimilation? The twisting of perception? I shook my head violently, trying to clear the fog. No, I whispered, my voice hoarse. Not me. I shone my flashlight beam around the vast space, trying to locate an exit, any way out. The carvings on the walls seemed to twist and contort in the flickering light, the distorted figures seeming to reach out, their silent screams now echoing in my mind. They depicted a cycle: arrival, transformation, absorption, and at the center of it all, a pulsating dark stone. Miller's conduit. I knew I was in the very heart of it. This was the Miller farm, or what lay beneath it. The conduit pulsed faintly with a sickly, purple-black light from a recess deeper in the cavern, a light I hadn't noticed before, overshadowed by my own terror. It was mesmerizing, terrifying. It felt like a living thing breathing, drawing me in. I had to break free of its influence. I squeezed my eyes shut for a moment, forcing myself to focus on Miller's final desperate words. The church. The relic. It's your only way out. But you must be strong. You must resist. Resist. That was the key. But how do you resist something that attacks your very mind, your sense of self? I took a shaky breath, forcing myself to stand taller. I wasn't David Miller. I wasn't going to let Ashwood County claim me. I had come here for answers, and I had them. Now I needed to act. The path to the church was outside, through the warped landscape of Ashwood. But first, I needed to escape this subterranean cage. I scanned the walls again, looking for any passage, any crack, anything that wasn't a solid rock face. Then I saw it, tucked away behind a particularly grotesque carving of a figure with too many limbs, a small, almost imperceptible crevice. It was barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, leading into absolute darkness. A gamble, but staying here was a death sentence or worse. The chilling moan intensified, closer now, accompanied by a faint, dragging sound. It was coming for me. I could feel its immense, cold presence growing behind me, a vast shadow extending its tendrils. With a surge of adrenaline, I scrambled towards the crevice, clutching the journal. I didn't know where it led, or what horrors awaited me on the other side. But it was a way out of this particular trap. As I squeezed through the narrow opening, the last thing I saw in the cavern was the pulsating dark light of the conduit, growing brighter, radiating an undeniable, horrifying power. And in the periphery of my vision, a shifting, indistinct shape, massive and ancient, seemed to coalesce from the deepest shadows, its formless mass reaching, grasping. I pushed forward, scraping my skin on the rough rock, the sound of my ragged breath echoing in the confined space. The air in the crevice was stale, thick with the smell of damp earth and something else, something metallic and sickly sweet. It was tight, claustrophobic, but I kept moving, driven by the primal fear of what I had left behind. The journal was still clutched in my hand, its pages holding the terrifying truth of Ashwood County. I was no longer just running from the unknown. I was running towards a desperate, dangerous mission. The relic, the church, my only hope. And as I crawled deeper into the suffocating darkness, I knew that Ashwood County wasn't just a place. It was a living, breathing, hungry entity, and I was caught in its ancient, terrible web. My next move would determine if I became the next sacrifice, or if I could somehow sever its hold and finally truly leave Ashwood behind. But first, I had to survive what lay ahead and find my way out of the depths of its lair. The journey to the church began now, armed with a terrifying truth and a desperate, fragile hope. The journey to the church began now, armed with a terrifying truth and a desperate, fragile hope. The air itself felt different, heavier, as if the very atmosphere of Ashwood County had coalesced into a suffocating shroud around me. Every rustle in the overgrown woods, every distant, unidentifiable sound that echoed through the oppressive night, seemed to whisper the entity's name. A name I now understood, a name that made my blood run cold. It wasn't merely a malevolent spirit. It was a parasitic consciousness, ancient and rooted, feeding on the fear and the lifeblood of its unwitting hosts, perpetuating its existence through a cycle of ritual sacrifice and forced devotion. The cult wasn't just a group of fanatics. They were its unwitting, or perhaps too witting, conduits, ensuring the flow of energy that kept the horror alive. The path through the woods was a labyrinth of gnarled roots and unseen obstacles, each step a gamble in the profound darkness. The moon, a sliver of bone-white light, struggled to penetrate the dense canopy, casting long, shifting shadows that played tricks on my eyes, transforming every tree trunk into a hunched figure, every bush into a lurking beast. My breath hitched in my throat with every snapping twig, every sudden gust of wind that rustled the leaves like 1,000 whispering voices. I could feel its gaze, a pervasive, chilling awareness that seemed to seep from the very soil beneath my feet, from the ancient, moss-covered stones along the forgotten trail. It knew I was coming. It had always known. My mind raced, piecing together the fragments of horror I had uncovered. The disappearances, the strange illnesses, the unwavering loyalty of the townspeople, the insidious way Ashwood had slowly, meticulously, devoured every visitor, every soul who dared to linger. It wasn't just about fear, it was about sustenance. The entity fed on the raw, primal terror of its victims, on their life force, on the despair of those left behind. Jessica, Michael, even David, whose desperate, cryptic warnings now resonated with a horrifying clarity. They were all threads in its intricate, hideous tapestry. The thought spurred me onward, a bitter fuel in my veins. I wouldn't let their sacrifices be in vain. I wouldn't let this thing continue its reign. The woods eventually thinned, giving way to a more open, desolate landscape. The true nature of Ashwood's desolation became starkly apparent under the faint moonlight. Fields of withered crops stretched out, skeletal remnants of harvests that never were, or perhaps, harvests that were taken for a different purpose entirely. The air grew colder, carrying with it a faint metallic tang that I instinctively knew was blood, or something akin to it. Distant, guttural sounds, rhythmic and low, began to penetrate the silence. Chanting. It was faint at first, barely a whisper on the wind, but as I pressed on it swelled, a discordant chorus that vibrated through the ground and settled deep in my bones. The church, when it finally loomed into view, was not the quaint, rustic structure I had imagined from the old map. It was a monstrosity, an ancient stone edifice, its Gothic architecture twisted and warped by centuries of neglect, and an unseen malignant force. Its spires, once soaring towards the heavens, now seemed to claw at the bruised sky, broken and jagged like the teeth of some primeval beast. The stained glass windows, even in the darkness, seemed to glow with an unnatural, sickly crimson light from within, pulsing faintly in time with the rhythmic chanting that now throbbed in the air. A low, constant hum emanated from the very foundations of the building, a sound that felt less like an architectural vibration and more like the respiration of something vast and terrible. A makeshift wooden fence, crude and splattered with what I desperately hoped was only mud, surrounded the perimeter, adorned with strange, intricate symbols carved into the wood, symbols I now recognized from the sheriff's hidden journal wards, meant not to keep something out, but to keep something in, or perhaps to channel its power. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror and resolve. This was it, the heart of Ashwood's darkness. As I crept closer, hugging the shadows of the ancient, skeletal trees that surrounded the church grounds, the chanting grew clearer, more defined. It was a language I didn't understand, but its intonation was unmistakable. A plea, a supplication, an offering. And then I saw them. Figures cloaked in dark robes, moving with a slow, deliberate grace around the church's entrance. Their faces were obscured by deep hoods, but I could feel the intensity of their devotion, a chilling, unwavering commitment to the entity. One figure stood apart, taller than the rest, their posture radiating an eerie authority. As they turned slightly, the moonlight briefly caught the silver glint of a badge. Sheriff Miller. He wasn't just complicit, he was a leader, a high priest in this unholy congregation. The man who had feigned concern, offered false comfort, and undoubtedly led countless souls to their doom. The rage that surged through me was cold and sharp, momentarily eclipsing the fear. I had to find a way in undetected. The front entrance was a death trap. I circled the church, searching for an alternative, my eyes scanning the ancient stone walls, noting crumbling sections, a potential window, anything. The rear of the church was even more overgrown, choked with thorny brambles and thick ivy that clung to the stone like grasping claws. But there, half obscured by a particularly dense thicket, was a small, ornate wooden door, its paint long peeled away, revealing dark, weathered wood. It looked like a service entrance, forgotten and disused. My fingers trembled as I reached for the cold, rusted iron handle. It was stiff, protesting with a groan that echoed too loudly in the suffocating silence between chants. With a surge of adrenaline, I pushed, and to my surprise, it gave way, swinging inward just enough to reveal a sliver of absolute darkness within. The air that wafted out was heavy, stagnant, smelling of dust, decay, and something else. Something ancient and metallic, like old blood and rust. I slipped inside, pulling the door shut behind me with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the sudden, profound silence. My eyes struggled to adjust, but the faint crimson glow from the stained glass windows in the main sanctuary provided just enough light to discern my surroundings. I was in a narrow, stone-walled corridor, leading deeper into the church. The chanting was muffled here, but it was still a pervasive thrum, a heartbeat of dread. This was it, the culmination of everything. The truth I had unearthed, the sacrifices I had witnessed, the horror that had consumed Ashwood County for generations. I knew now that the entity wasn't a ghost to be appeased, or a demon to be exorcised in the traditional sense. It was an anchor, a parasitic root deeply embedded in the very fabric of this land, regenerating itself through the fear and devotion of its cult. To truly sever its hold, I couldn't just escape. I had to rip it out at its source, whatever that source might be. I had a desperate, half-formed plan, pieced together from David's cryptic notes and the chilling revelations of the sheriff's journal. It was a long shot, a gamble with my very soul, but it was the only chance Ashwood had, and the only chance I had to finally truly leave this cursed place behind. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the metallic tang of the air filling my lungs. The final confrontation was here. The air grew thick, not just with metallic tang, but with a palpable sense of dread that pressed in on me from all sides. The lighthouse beam, usually a comforting sentinel against the encroaching darkness, now seemed to carve out an arena for something ancient and terrible. I pushed open the heavy door at the base, the groan of rusted hinges echoing like a death rattle. Inside, the spiral staircase wound upwards into an oppressive gloom, each step I took feeling like a descent into madness, rather than an ascent to salvation. A low guttural chanting vibrated through the stone, growing louder with every floor I climbed. It wasn't human speech, not entirely. It was a symphony of whispers, the very ones that had haunted Ashwood, coalescing into a single resonant frequency that threatened to tear my mind apart. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the impending doom. At last, I reached the top chamber, the glass-encased lantern room. The air here was electric, thrumming with raw, untamed power. And there he was, Elias Thorne. He stood at the center, surrounded by a ring of robed figures, their faces obscured by deep hoods. They swayed in unison, their hands outstretched towards a pulsating, shimmering distortion in the very air above them, directly beneath the giant lens of the lighthouse. It was a tear, a gaping wound in reality, bleeding a sickly iridescent light that cast their faces in grotesque hues. Thorn turned, his eyes, once cold and calculating, now blazed with an almost manic glee. "Michael, you came." His voice was a low purr, laced with an unnerving satisfaction. "I knew you would." The whispers draw everyone in eventually. Ashwood claims its own. I gripped the crude, heavy iron bar I'd found in the shed, a desperate weapon against a cosmic horror. "What is this, Thorn? What have you done to this town?" He laughed, a dry, rasping sound that scraped against my nerves. "Done? I have merely facilitated what was always meant to be. This place, Michael, is a nexus, a thin place where the veil between worlds frays. For generations, the families of Ashwood have tended it, fed it, kept the conduit open. The sickness, the disappearances, all part of the cycle, all to nourish what lies beyond." He gestured to the shimmering rift. "It hungers, and we, the chosen, provide. The lighthouse? It's not just a beacon for ships. It's a focal point, a lens to sharpen the connection, to draw it closer. The whispers you heard? Those were its tendrils, reaching into your mind, preparing you. Preparing all of them." My blood ran cold. "Preparing us for what?" "For the harvest," Thorn said, his voice rising, resonating with the chanting of his followers. "The complete opening, the final merging. Ashwood County will be the bridge, the first foothold for true awakening. And your soul, Michael, so attuned to its frequencies, so resistant yet so drawn, will be the perfect anchor." The robed figures intensified their chanting. The rift above them pulsed faster, expanding, and I saw shapes within it, not quite solid, not quite liquid, writhing like a nest of unseen serpents. A wave of nausea washed over me, the air growing heavy, making it hard to breathe. I could feel the entity's presence, immense and ancient, pressing down. It wasn't just in the rift. It was everywhere, seeping into the stone, the air, my very bones. "You're insane," I choked out, trying to push back the terror. Thorn merely smiled. "Insane? Or enlightened? We offer ourselves, yes, but in return we become part of something greater. We transcend. The petty concerns of your world will be meaningless." I remembered Sarah, her desperate plea, her warnings. I remembered the faces of the missing, the innocent lives swallowed by this horror. I would not let Ashwood be erased. I would not let this thing break through. "No," I said, my voice barely a whisper, but firm enough to carry through the rising cacophony. "You won't. I know how to stop it." Thorn's smile faltered. "You know nothing. You are but a fleeting spark against an eternal flame." "The artifacts," I said, my voice gaining strength. "The ones the old families kept hidden. The ones meant to seal the rift, not open it." I pulled out the 3 items I'd collected: the obsidian shard from the old general store, the tarnished silver locket from the abandoned house, and the dried, twisted root from the old woman's garden. They felt warm in my hands, almost vibrating with the latent energy. Thorn's eyes narrowed, a flicker of genuine fear crossing his face. "Fool! Those are relics of a forgotten age, of those who resisted the truth. They are powerless." "Are they?" I challenged, taking a step forward. The chanting faltered slightly as the robed figures felt Thorn's sudden unease. "These aren't just trinkets. They're anchors. Each one resonates with a different aspect of this place, a different point in time when the veil was most vulnerable. The obsidian to ground it, the silver to reflect it, the root to bind it." I knew this was a gamble. Sarah's notes were fragmented, the old lore obscure. But the desperation in Thorn's eyes told me I was onto something. "Attack him!" Thorn shrieked, his voice losing its calm composure, replaced by a desperate snarl. "Stop him!" The robed figures surged forward, their movements strangely fluid, unnatural. They weren't just people. They were something else, their eyes glowing faintly beneath their hoods. They were already too far gone. I didn't hesitate. I swung the iron bar, catching the first figure in the side, sending them sprawling. The impact felt wrong, like hitting something hollow, yielding. I dodged another, its outstretched hand clawing at my face, a faint, sickly green glow emanating from its fingertips. This wasn't a fight against humans. This was a fight against something twisted, corrupted. I couldn't waste time on them. My focus had to be the rift and Thorn. I lunged towards Thorn, ignoring the others snapping at my heels. He moved with surprising agility for his age, sidestepping my attack. He wasn't just a cult leader. He was deeply integrated, empowered by the entity itself. His hands glowed with the same sickly green light I'd seen on the other figures, and he thrust them forward. A wave of concussive force slammed into me, throwing me back against the glass wall of the lighthouse. The impact rattled my teeth and I tasted blood, but I held on to the artifacts. I wouldn't drop them. You cannot stop what is inevitable. Thorn roared, advancing, his eyes burning with unnatural power. The world will be reborn. Not on my watch. I yelled, pushing myself to my feet. The pain was searing, but a new kind of resolve surged through me. I wasn't just fighting for Ashwood anymore. I was fighting for every innocent person who had ever been lured here, every life consumed. I clutched the obsidian shard, its rough surface biting into my palm. With a primal scream, I threw it. It spun end over end, striking the very center of the pulsating rift above Thorn's head. There was no sound, no explosion, only a sudden violent sucking noise like the world itself was inhaling. The rift shimmered erratically, contracting around the shard, which began to glow with an intense, furious black light. Thorn staggered, clutching his head. "No! What have you done?" The roped figures wailed, a chorus of inhuman agony. The green light in their hands guttered and died. I didn't wait. I scrambled forward, pulling the silver locket from my pocket. It felt cold now, radiating an icy calm. I hurled it next, aiming for the same point. This time, when the locket struck, a blinding flash of pure white light erupted from the rift, momentarily eclipsing the black. The two opposing lights clashed, tearing at each other, creating a maelstrom of energy that made the entire lighthouse shake violently. The glass walls groaned, threatening to shatter. Thorn screamed, his voice no longer human, but a guttural shriek of rage and pain. He collapsed to his knees, his hands pressed against his temples, his body racked with tremors. The roped figures fell one by one, their robes empty, their forms dissipating into wisps of shadow. Whatever held them together was unraveling. The entity was recoiling, its tendrils retracting, screaming in silent agony as the anchors took hold. But it wasn't enough. The tear was still there, smaller but still threatening to burst open. I still had the twisted root. This was the binding. This was the final lock. I stumbled towards the rift, ignoring the pain, ignoring the ringing in my ears. Thorn was thrashing on the ground, his body convulsing, his features twisting into something monstrous, no longer human. He was a vessel, and the entity was being torn from him. With a final desperate surge of strength, I reached the shrinking, swirling vortex. The air around it crackled with raw energy, threatening to rip me apart. I could see glimpses of something within it, something vast and indifferent, a cosmic horror beyond human comprehension. I thrust the gnarled root into the center of the rift. This time there was a deafening crack, like thunder striking inside the chamber. The black and white lights flared one last time, merging into a single blinding flash that threw me back against the wall, knocking the breath from my lungs. Then silence. Absolute, profound silence. The light faded. The room was dark, save for the faint glow of the lighthouse lens itself, now a normal, comforting beam cutting through the night. The metallic tang in the air was gone, replaced by the clean, crisp scent of the ocean. The rift was gone. In its place, embedded in the very air, were the three artifacts: the obsidian shard, the silver locket, and the twisted root, now glowing with a soft, steady light intertwined, forming a single intricate symbol of containment. They pulsed gently, almost breathing, a silent guardian against the darkness. I pushed myself up, my body aching, my head throbbing. The roped figures were gone, dissolved into nothingness. Thorn was also gone, vanished without a trace, leaving only a faint, acrid smell in the air where he had been. The entity, whatever it was, had been forced back, sealed away. I stumbled down the spiral staircase, my legs heavy, each step an effort. When I finally emerged from the lighthouse, the night sky was clear, studded with stars, and the ocean waves crashed rhythmically against the shore. A sound of peace, not menace. The faint, oppressive hum that had permeated Ashwood County for so long was gone. The whispers were gone. I stood on the bluff, catching my breath, watching the lighthouse beam sweep across the water. It was over. The town was safe. But I knew I couldn't stay. The memory of what I'd seen, what I'd faced, was etched onto my soul. Ashwood had been saved, but it had left an indelible mark on me. I had seen behind the veil, glimpsed the true horror that lurked just beyond human perception. I walked back towards my truck, the old Ford, feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was overshadowed by a profound sense of relief. As I started the engine, the familiar rumble, a welcome sound in the quiet night, I looked back at the lighthouse, its beam still sweeping, a silent promise that the darkness was held at bay. I knew the history of Ashwood County would remain, a dark stain in the annals of local lore, but perhaps now it could begin to heal. I put the truck in gear, pulling away from the cliffside, leaving the silent sentinel behind. I drove through the quiet streets of Ashwood, past the houses where people were hopefully sleeping peacefully, unaware of the battle fought for their safety. I passed the general store, the old library, the abandoned motel. They all looked the same but felt different, lighter. I reached the county line sign, the one that had haunted me for so long. Welcome to Ashwood County. I drove past it without stopping, without looking back. I wasn't just leaving Ashwood County, I was leaving a part of myself behind, a part that had faced the abyss and survived. The road ahead was dark, stretching into an unknown future, but it was a future free from whispers, free from the crushing weight of an ancient evil. My name is Michael, and I finally understood. Some places are best left undisturbed. Some doors are meant to stay closed. And sometimes the only way to truly escape the darkness is to never ever stop. Not even for a moment. Not even for a second. Just drive. Keep driving. And never look back.